Yesterday we began looking at some hindrances to our prayers. We noted the fact that having a spirit of unforgiveness can hinder our prayers to God. We also talked about the fact that having wandering attention by not being able to focus upon the task at hand and communicate to God as we should could hinder our prayers, as well as continuing in sin. Some Christians continue to sin and continue to pray and think that their prayers are going to be acceptable. But God tells us very plainly that if one continues to sin, his prayers are an abomination to God. Today, we're going to continue in this study first by looking at the fact that a lack of interest in spiritual matters can hinder our prayers. There is a lack of spirituality among some Christians today. Other matters like sports, their job, fashion, houses, hobbies, television, and entertainment, these are the things that occupy their time and their interests. Thus we're easily robbed of the time that should be spent devoted to spiritual matters. Not every hindrance is wrong within itself. Sometimes we find that we're simply choked with the cares and the riches and the pleasures of this life, Luke 8 and verse 14. And our love for this present world may hinder our service to God, 2 Timothy 4 and verse 10. Our concern for the physical man can at times as well exceed our concern for the soul. Some Christians spend very little time in reading their Bibles or using good study aids to help in their Bible study. But we make time for and do the things that we really have interest in. And something is wrong with our priorities when we think nothing of spending large sums of money for houses, cars, electronics, and vacations, and furniture, and fashionable clothing. And yet we think it's too much to buy a nice Bible or good study aids for ourselves. With some, spiritual matters are not on their minds that often, and when one is not spiritually minded, we find that he is less apt to pray without ceasing, as Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 17. Also we see that sometimes self-righteousness can be a hindrance to our prayers. The Pharisee that we see in the parable of the Pharisee and the publican in Luke 18 verses 9 through 14 is a wonderful example of a self-righteous person. He thought of himself as spiritually superior to others. In fact, he thanked God that he was not like others. He was not the one who was justified. When we become proud and think of ourselves as something special spiritually, then we find that our prayers are going to be hindered to God. Also, we see sometimes that time is a hindrance to our prayers. We cannot afford to allow our jobs and our social pleasures to rob us of time needed to pray to God. It's possible to busy our lives with so many things that we don't have time to pray as we ought. And we find many examples of Jesus, who is our ultimate example, making time for prayer. And we need to do the same. Sometimes also we find that issues within our families can hinder our prayers. The passage that tells us our prayers can be hindered, 1 Peter 3 and verse 7, has a context of dealing with the husband and wife relationship. If a husband does not dwell with his wife according to knowledge, and honor her as the weaker vessel and treat her as an equal heir of the grace of life, then very simply put, Peter says his prayers are hindered. If that is true of husbands, the same principle would be true of wives. If she does not treat her husband right and strive to be the wife that God would have her to be, then her prayers would be hindered. This would also apply to parents in their relationship to their children, the positions of authority that they have, and the instruction to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. If they're not fulfilling the things that are expected of them, then their prayers can be hindered. So today, friends, let us all be diligent to make ourselves approved before God, that our prayers may not be hindered. Friends, we thank you for joining us for our program today. We hope that God blesses you with a wonderful day today and a wonderful weekend ahead.